So what was it, June or July, where you and I had just driven that all-new Toyota Camry? We're up in Oregon. It was cool, yet odd for the Pacific Northwest, it was sunny. Then we entered an alternate universe. We have driven far too many crossovers in that time. We even flew all the way out to Hawaii where it was pissing down rain to drive one of those baby-sized crossovers. So it would stand to reason, the sedan, it's dead. Well, what's the old saying about the fat lady? Apparently Toyota has not heard her sing yet, because now they're doubling down on that sedan investment when everybody else is running for the exit door. And we'll talk about that more in the coming full first drive review of this, the 2019 Toyota Avalon. But I found out something interesting that I need to share with you. So normally I like to hang out with the designers and the engineers when I come drive these things, because frankly they're the cool kids that build the cars. But instead I talked to one of the business people, and they were sharing the sales figures for Q1 of the Toyota Camry, and it turns out Q1 of this year, the best sales for the Camry in over 10 years. So another old saying, something about reports of my death are greatly exaggerated. So our job today is to do a tech review of this, the 2019 Toyota Avalon, this one being a touring. We're going to talk about the touring as well as the hybrid because we're going to drive both. But a little bit of full disclosure, I never thought I'd be sharing a Toyota Avalon with you on this show when I started out almost 9 years ago, because frankly, this is the nicest Buick that Buick has never built. Now, as we will find out when we get into some more of the tech stuff, it's not as much Buick anymore. So back to the hangar for a bit, because it's an incredibly exciting day here at MotoManTV Studio 1. I know you have seen this, the Yak 50, in pretty much every episode of Season 9, but you've never seen it with this, a prop. So today the prop was installed, and they did a whole prop balance on it, so it is now a flyable aircraft again. So if you follow me on Instagram, you may see this up in the air. MotoManTV, all one word, do it now. But being that we're talking about engines, let's talk about Toyota engines. So the basic engine on offer is a 3.5 liter V6. It is 301 horsepower, which comes in at 6,600 RPM. Ouch! 267 pounds of torque, comes in at 4,700 RPM. So this is kind of a lazy old V6. You can have anything you want as long as it's an 8-speed automatic. Then there's the car that's all about the fuel economy, and that is the hybrid version. And that has a 4-cylinder as well as an electric motor. So it's a 2.5 4-cylinder that we saw in that Camry. So it's 176 horsepower, comes in at 5,700 RPM, and 163 pounds of torque, comes in at 3,900 RPM, stays flat all the way up to 5,200 RPM. Then there's the electric motor, which is an additional 118 horsepower. But we've talked about this in many episodes before. You don't just take 176 and 118 and that's the total system horsepower. You need to figure it out, and it comes out to 215 total system horsepower in this application. So that's 15 more than the car it replaces, and that also comes with only one transmission on offer, and it's the same that you've seen in pretty much every Toyota hybrid synergy drive system that we've seen, with the exception of the LC and the LS that has that cool like 4-speed reduction gear thing. So it's anything you want as long as it's a CVT. So with that, back to Del Mar. Right about now, let's pose the obvious question. Avalon or ES? Same platform, similar car, very similar money. So what are the differences? I would argue there's two. Number one, it falls under the heading of, have you ever read the book, The Millionaire Next Door? If you've been following the show for a while, you know I'm a huge Dave Ramsey fan. Well, this predates Dave Ramsey, and I would argue it's the Bible for the kind of person that would buy a car like this. And oh, as an aside, you can follow my book recommendations, which is not just financial books, at hashtag MotoManTV Book Club or MMTV Book Club, and that's on Instagram. Anyway, back to the second point, which is design. You look at the interior of this, it's very different than it would be in a Lexus, and I would argue this falls under the heading of the Toyota design language has changed. And this one, it's not as busy as other designs, and I would argue it cashes the checks that the exterior writes. However, there's a couple of things beneath the surface you don't necessarily see, and you know I never like to tell you what you guys can see. Well, first and foremost is color and trim. This is called Cognac. It is the fanciest interior on offer, and there's a couple of things going on with Cognac. Notice it's only here, as well as on the seats. And specifically on the insets as well on the seats, it's got like the diamond stitch pattern that you would find on a Bentley. Then it goes a step further where it has contrasting stitching in a color that kind of picks up the Cognac. Then there's wood. Now the obvious question is that real wood? And the answer is not only is it real wood, it's wood made by the people who make Yamaha pianos. Now, of course, I don't know why, but there is a different trim on offer, which is aluminum, and like the fancy, like the non-limited model, which this is. I would prefer the wood in every case, especially if it's made by a piano manufacturer. And then the Touring, which we're going to drive in the full first drive review, it's got this weird black trim. Open letter to the folks at Toyota, just go with the wood, because think about the people who would drive this car, and it's so much nicer with the wood. Then there's a couple of other things going on, like notice the center stack here. Dare I say it has design inspiration from a 928. Granted, it's got a screen at the top, but the general concept is the same. And then there's the tech, 8-inch head-up display. Moving down to the gauge cluster, there's a TFT screen in between the two gauges. Now this one's a hybrid, so it has the Charge Eco power meter instead of a tachometer. Now, last but certainly not least, may I introduce you to my formerly lonely iPhone, especially when you were in Toyota. Take this USB plug here, put it into the jack here, and let's see what happens here. Watch. It's like a magic trick. And then all of a sudden, Apple CarPlay in a Toyota. Now you guys know I like talking about driving dynamics back in the hangar, but it's not every day that we shoot these things in Del Mar, California, right by the ocean, and it's certainly not every day that I get to steal some show and tell. Please do not tell the chief engineer I did this, because something tells me I won't get away with this trick again. Anyway, with that, let's talk about some of the bits that make up driving dynamics. The basics: struts up front, multi-link in the rear. And there's a couple of things that are interesting that you wouldn't expect in an Avalon. In all of them, whether it's a Touring like this or even a basic one, they all have stabilizer bars, both front and rear. Then there are the brakes. Up front, 12-inch diameter. In the rear, 11.06 inches diameter. And that's whether it's a hybrid or internal combustion engine. Then the wheels, 17s or 18s. But what's incredibly interesting is it's not just the Touring that gets the 18-inch wheels like these. The hybrids get the 18-inch wheels as well. Then let's put aside all this stuff and let's focus just on the Touring, which this is, and the car we're going to drive in the first of the two first drive reviews that we do with an Avalon. Adjustable dampers. Now, you and I talk about this a lot in fancy cars, in like AMGs, and even in Porsches, but never in Toyota Avalons, because these are meant for your grandparents. Well, apparently that's a change-in, and now we have adjustable dampers. Only on offer in the Touring. And basically, this is not one of these like super fancy air ride systems that we see in the Mercedes, or it's not a magnetic ride system like we see in the Cadillacs, where there are magnets inside the damper that are charged to change the polarity, thus whether it's compliant or stiff. This is a basic damper with fluid in it, and then there's a valve. And the concept is to make this very reliable, because after all, it's a Toyota. And the valve just goes in or out based on the electricity sent to the valve. Now, there are 650 different positions within the valve. So when the valve is completely open, there's more room for the fluid to go, thus making the damper more compliant, thus the ride is softer. Then, when there's electricity sent to it, the valve closes. And the best way to describe this, it's like a Venturi effect, where there's more pressure, so there's less places for the fluid to go, thus making the damper stiffer, thus making the ride stiffer. Now, isn't this so much cooler when I have show and tell? So in keeping with tradition, back to the hangar to talk about some important numbers. And here we need to talk about dimensions first, because I feel there's an unusual visual design trick going on. You look at this thing and you say, that is much longer than the car it replaces. And in reality, what's happening is a couple of things. There's a bit more width, it sits lower, but most importantly, all those horizontal lines on the side, it reads as longer. Now, basis of comparison, this is a mid-size, business class, executive sedan. A very fast one, but still a mid-size. This is a 117-inch wheelbase. You look at this and you say, this has to be shorter than the Avalon. In reality, it's 4 inches longer, and the overall length of the Avalon is 195.9 inches. Now, how does that translate to weight? And before I give you the actual numbers, got to understand something very important here. You know, in the Hyundai Kia episodes, where we talk about 52% high-strength steel, and that happens because Hyundai, that's a steel company masquerading as a car company. Toyota is absolutely a car company. So there is some lightweighting going on. I did speak to the assistant chief engineer of the Avalon, great guy based in Detroit. And he turns out the high-strength steel in the Avalon is mainly around the passenger compartment. And what that translates to in the most basic internal combustion engine Avalon, 3,560 pounds. But really what you and I have to focus on is what's the delta between that and the car with two propulsion systems, the hybrid, and the fanciest one at that. And it turns out this is where we get into, I can't believe the pace of change, because it wasn't that long ago that a propulsion system, two of them in a hybrid, was a 500 to 800 pound delta. Now, and actually up to 1,000 pounds in some cases. Now, in the Avalon, 155 pounds. So total weight of like the fanciest limited edition Avalon, 3,715 pounds. Okay, so the thing that you and I are gonna have to focus on in not one, but two full first drive reviews, the V6 as well as the hybrid, is how does that all impact the driving dynamics? There's some other stuff going on there, so make sure you come back for those two episodes. Most likely I'm going to slide in a ridiculous, totally impractical car in between those two cars because I don't want to give you too much practicality in a straight line of episodes. So make sure you come back for those. And an incentive to come back for that second hybrid episode. There may or may not be a guest co-host, and something tells me you will like him a lot. Anyway, so I'm going to leave you with a question. The question is this. Let's go back to that visual design trick. When I saw this thing first in person at the auto show, I was like, I can't believe that is an Avalon, and I can't believe I actually like it. And I would argue, before you go on and on about the grill, you got to see it in person to really understand. So I'm going to turn this around to you, and I'm going to leave you with a very simple question. Do you like the design, or do you not like the design? And let me know what you like or what you don't like about it. And you know what? For good measure, let me know of an example of a design you like better than this in the same segment, meaning you can't come up with an FDRX7. It'd have to be like a Buick LaCrosse or a Nissan Maxima, you know, something that this car competes with. Let me know in the comments below or via our social media, MotoManTV on Word, MotoManTV on Word, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Until I see you next time, bis später.